What do you make of both the Supreme Court's decision and how long it took to make it?
Well, I think the shocking part for me was it's not so much that they took it, it's the delay in how they took it. Just remember, if they were going to take it, they could have just granted Jack Smith's request to hear it from the district court. Remember, he had made an application saying, you know what, just hear it directly. If you want to hear this and you know you're going to decide it because you really feel like the Supreme Court is the one that has to lay down the law here, just take it directly from the district court. They said no. So you already built in all the delay at the Court of Appeals. Then there was this application to have it heard, and this sort of thinking was, well, it was taking them 2 weeks just to decide, and the thought was they're going to say no, because why would it take 2 weeks? So you're either going to take it or not. So I think it caught a lot of people, including myself, by surprise. And then the third piece is the schedule they set, because we're here at the end of February, and they're not going to hear it until the end of April. So all of that is a lot of time when you're looking at the clock, which is that Judge Chutkan had said this trial was going to be in March. And this clearly is saying, we really don't care about your schedule. And it may bump against the election or not. And that's really what's in jeopardy today.
But what about on what grounds are they deciding to hear this, right? We were waiting and waiting for those 3 circuit court judges, right, that panel. And when we finally got their ruling, you said, well, they took their time because they wanted this to be airtight. They have given a gift to the Supreme Court that there are absolutely no openings. The Supreme Court can't possibly say, we're going to want to hear it. But alas, they did.
Well, on the merits, so there's sort of 2 pieces. There's the merits and then there's the timing. On the merits, you could have the court ultimately say there's no presidential immunity as a principle, but in fact, they will be giving Donald Trump immunity because he will not be able to have a trial before the election. So if he wins the election, he de facto is immune.
My gosh, Glenn, is there any precedent for a president having complete legal immunity? Because for the average person listening to Donald Trump speaking at the podium, he acts like it's a given.
Yeah, there's no precedent. Even in the civil context, he doesn't have absolute immunity against civil liability. And there's been no precedent at all regarding whether a president is immune from prosecution. There is some precedent that he's not immune from criminal processes like subpoenas, having to comply with subpoenas and criminal investigations. By natural extension, you would think he wouldn't be immune from prosecution. Indeed, even the Constitution says that even if a president is impeached, he can still be prosecuted for the same conduct. So it's a head scratcher as to why they are accepting review of the case. But I couldn't agree more with Andrew. The way they just sort of casually sold American democracy down the river by putting this off for 2 months down the road when they could have taken this up just 2 weeks from now, Steph, what they have done is all but deprived the American voters from knowing whether, when they go to the polls in November, assuming Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, they are voting for a convicted felon or somebody who has been fully cleared by a jury of his peers, found not guilty on all charges. I think the American people are entitled to know who they're voting for. Somebody who tried to overturn the last presidential election or an absolutely innocent man. And the Supreme Court has all but taken that away from the American voters.
Susan, is it fair to say that this will be one of the biggest decisions in our court's history? What's at stake here?
Look, the election is at stake. A view of American democracy is at stake. The legitimacy of the Supreme Court, by the way, is at stake. And I know that Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, is often reported to be someone who cares very much about the legitimacy of his institution. He appears to have, really dealt a blow to the credibility of the institution. You have great legal experts on here. I'm not that. But I have to say, my immediate thought turned to how quickly the Supreme Court was able to move in Bush versus Gore back in 2000. I thought back to, when I was just a little kid and the Nixon Watergate tapes. the Supreme Court moved with lightning speed to decide that. If this isn't a kind of commensurate emergency, in my view, it's actually a much greater emergency, because not only are the credibility of our institutions at stake and individual laws, but the very question about whether the United States might elect someone who would be a felon for the first time in history. Donald Trump is the first former president to have been indicted, and the idea that Americans are going to go to the polls without really understanding whether he's guilty or not of the crimes he's charged with, which are crimes against our democracy. I just find this to be a very big moment. In 2024, I'm not sure we're going to have many other big days that are bigger than this one.
Oof. Andrew, what would it mean if the highest court in the land decides that a president of the United States is immune from any and all prosecution?
Well, you know what? Even though I'm very pessimistic about what happened today in terms of whether it will get to trial, I'm, maybe call me like an optimist on this point. I just don't think that's going to happen. I do not think there will be 5 justices who say that he is immune in this circumstance. The idea that you could engage in criminality involving the overthrow of an election, even if they say we're not going to say you're sort of have immunity for everything, I just can't imagine for this that they're going to say they'll have 5 votes. My biggest concern is that they de facto have said that, because they might write a very flowery opinion that we all sit around and go, isn't this wonderful, about how they're upholding the rule of law. But they will have been, in fact, denying the rule of law in this case by not allowing a trial to go forward. Because even though we can all look at the facts, so the way sort of disputed issues are decided in this country is they go to court and people can assess the facts, a jury can hear it, the American public can read about it, and that's the way we decide things. And I think that is what's being deprived now.
Glenn, Donald Trump's attorneys are going to be arguing this before his legal fate in front of these 9 justices, 3 of them appointed to the bench by Donald Trump himself. Is there any chance that we see any of the 3 of them recuse themselves? I haven't even mentioned Clarence Thomas. That's a whole other thing.
What a quaint notion that a justice who has the appearance of a conflict might feel compelled to remove themselves from the case. Recusal doesn't seem to be a thing anymore, Steph, although when you look at the federal law, the bar to have a judge be required to remove themselves from a case is actually pretty low. It just says if the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Might is not all that high a bar, and reasonableness is an objective standard. I maintain that there are any number of legal experts far smarter than me that have questioned the impartiality of people like Justice Thomas, of people like Judge Cannon down in Florida. Have we seen a recusal? No, we sure haven't, and I don't think we should expect to see one anytime soon.
Republicans say they support IVF, but Senator Cindy Hyde dismissed today's bill, saying it's a vast overreach. What does that tell you about the Republican Party?
It tells me they're in a twist and they don't know what the hell they're doing at this point. The dog caught the car once again. They never dream. Stephanie, this issue and the whole pro-life, pro-choice issue and abortion after the Dobbs decision has been demagogued for so many years, over and over. And they use the catchphrases. And it was really easy when you had Roe as a backstop to say, I am pro-life and life begins at conception. And don't think past that. And they didn't. And that's why you had all of these Republicans on all these bills throughout in the Congress and in the various states, and they didn't think it through. And all of a sudden now a Supreme Court has taken the next logical legal step given what they had in front of them.
That's my question. How did the Alabama Supreme Court get here?
They got there because the state of Alabama in 2018 enacted a constitutional amendment protecting the rights of unborn children. That's the definition. unborn children, giving them all the rights and privileges of anyone. Then the state Alabama legislature had a very restrictive abortion law. And is
that what the people of Alabama want? You know those voters.
You know, I don't think the people of Alabama really want those kind of restrictions. I've never believed that. But we're in a very gerrymandered legislative state. And so there is a small minority of folks in those gerrymandered districts who do want that kind of very far-reaching restrictive laws regarding abortion. And so that's what carried the day and what the Supreme Court did, except for Justice Parker, which really based his decision on the Bible instead of on the law. It was a logical step. And that's the point that people need to think about around the country. You know, you can
elaborate, because people around the country don't think about that.
No, they don't think, and they think, oh, that's just Alabama. Well, let me tell you something. The United States could be Alabamified if they're not careful, because this is being applauded. That decision is being applauded by these far-right groups across the country. And you see them, and they're going to start taking the Alabama law, even though that law just right now applies only to Alabama. It is that roadmap. They already have that roadmap now to do exactly what they want to.
Is that what you meant? You just last week, you said Donald Trump paved the way for this.
Yeah, there's no question about it. He made sure that he put 3 people on the Supreme Court of the United States that would overturn Roe versus Wade, to give the states like Alabama and the others the authority to do what they did without thinking it through, without understanding the full consequences for women, for families. They don't think that way. They pander and they talk in terms of political catchphrases.
Okay, but then let's talk politics, because most Americans do not believe that frozen embryos are children. Is this wise to do this heading into a presidential election? Right? I think back to when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Remember how people were so worried for Democrats about the midterms, and what fired up people to vote? This.
Well, look, the Alabama judicial system is not operating on that 24 election cycle. Okay. Although you've got one of the members that is running for Chief Justice, because our Bible thumping Chief Justice is retiring. He can't run again. So he's not going to be on there. So you do have an election year politics coming into play. But this took its normal course. There was a wrongful death suit filed, appeals taken, and this was a normal course. And it happened to come out right here at election time, which I think is a wake-up call and a signal for the rest of the country. This is still a significant issue going into 2024.
Do you think this could fire up voters, right? I think about young voters who in recent polls have been kind of sluggish about this upcoming election. Democrats are worried about it. Could this be a motivator?
Oh, if it's not, I don't know how you get so many families. How many people across this country? You know someone, there's someone in your family, there's a neighbor, there's someone you know. There are so many people that are touched by IVF. It's the only way they can have families. And yes, you've got, and what's really interesting about this is that if you look and see who, you know, most of the people that are being affected, there's a lot of people in Alabama that are sacrificing so much because this is an expensive procedure. It is not covered by insurance. Mm-hmm. They are living in mobile homes as opposed after they've sold their house to try to have a family. But, Stephanie, most of the people that are involved, that are affected by this, are people that do have some means. They do have money. And that's another reason why Republicans are in a twist, because it's affecting people that they think vote for them. And it's not affecting, they believe, the minority communities the way the Dobbs decision has affected so many. There is an element to this of they are going to fight for those suburban white folks that you see that are really affected by this. And again, I'm not saying that it doesn't affect everybody, because it does. But there's a reason why the Republicans in Alabama are in such a twist right now about this, when they did not think that through, and they did not fight for Medicaid expansion, and they did not fight to make choices for women in their reproductive health.
Maria, I just said it. I don't even want to give them credit. No shutdown this weekend, but maybe one next weekend. This is incredible. There is no business, great or small, that could ever operate like this pack of jokers. Do you think anything's getting done here?
Stephanie, this is the challenge right now with what we have is such dysfunction in Congress. And it's one of the reasons why so many Americans are kind of fed up with politics, to be honest, is that they have voted elected individuals to actually carry out the people's business, and they continue to fail to do so. And it's not just impacting our standing here in the United States amongst our neighbors and whether or not we're going to continue thriving as a country, but increasingly we're seeing international entities really scratching their heads and saying, you have a booming economy, but can we really take a bet on the United States right now because you have such great dysfunction in your government? And it's one of the things that I think that has to be addressed during the election, because it's going to be increasingly hard for foreign investment here, because they're going to say, we just can't actually make a bet on the American economy if you have such dysfunction in your Congress. Completely self-inflicting wounds.
Excuse me. Charlie, Mitch McConnell said it earlier this week. Government shutdowns do not help anyone politically. So why do Republicans keep taking us to the brink?
Because they like the chaos, and because they're not a serious governing party. I mean, this perma crisis has been just a feature of the Republican Party. It feels like for the last decade. So we go through this elaborate kabuki dance. I mean, the number one job of government is to keep the lights on, and yet there's a faction in this party that has no interest in doing that. And, you know, I'm really glad that Doug Jones made the one point about Mitch McConnell. As much as people may not like Mitch McConnell or disagree with him, what's coming is likely to be worse. We've seen what's been happening with the House of Representatives. And in many ways, Mitch McConnell was the last bulwark against the crazies, turning the United States Senate into what the House of Representatives has become. And when he's gone, I mean, after him comes the deluge, because, you know, he stood there in the floor of the Senate and basically acknowledged he understood the way his party was going, he understood the politics of his party. And he understands that he held out as long as he could against the Trumpification of the Senate GOP, and now he's gone. So be careful what you wish for.
Of what he said, Charlie. He said he wants to make room for the next generation of leaders. If the next generation is taking us to the house of crazy, then do you buy it? He knows they're crazy. He doesn't like them. He hates Donald Trump.
This is what's fascinating to me, because just a couple of days ago, we read in the New York Times that there are these back-channel negotiations for Mitch McConnell to endorse Donald Trump. I want you to think about that. You know, on one level, it's not surprising because he's a partisan animal. On the other hand, we ought to be really shocked by this, considering that he does hate Donald Trump. He knows who Donald Trump is. He knows what Donald Trump did on January 6th. And he had the opportunity back in 2021 to rid us of Donald Trump. If Mitch McConnell had pulled the trigger, we would not be at the moment we are right now. They would have voted to convict. It's very possible he would have voted to convict Donald Trump for his inciting the attack on the Capitol. Then we would not be facing this particular crisis. So I am fascinated by the question of whether, now that he has nothing to lose, he will still go ahead and bow the knee to Donald Trump, ending his career, this long and rather successful career, with the humiliation that so many of his other colleagues have been willing to undergo in order to stay relevant.
And he doesn't need to humiliate himself, Maria. He is consciously, voluntarily stepping out of power. All of these other people need to continue to bow at the altar of Trump so they can stay in power. What do you make of McConnell's move?
Well, here's the thing. His leaving does make more chaos in the Senate because of the next generation of leaders is exactly what Charlie described. They are unhinged in many ways. They actually do not believe in the process of government. They don't believe in democracy. And I'm talking about little d democracy. But I also think that there's an opportunity here for the Republican Party, for those individuals that do espouse Ronald Reagan, that they actually are fashioned after what the Republican used to be. And that is by saying, let's actually declare ourselves independent. Let's actually go forth and say, we are not Democrats. We are not MAGA Republicans. We are independent. And the amount of groundswell, I believe, from individuals by saying, look, we are standing up to the Republicans, but we still believe in our governance. We still believe in our institutions. It allows a way for a third party, I believe, that we haven't seen since the last century, if folks remember. And that actually allows for the Republicans who are moderate, whether it is the Mitt Romneys that have recently retired, or if it is the Jody Ernst and the Lisa Murkowskis, for them to find themselves and to speak to the American people about the importance of having a conservative branch that actually does believe in governance.